Hello. This I'm gonna put a disclaimer at the very start. This entire series or whatever I'm gonna be posting is mainly meant as an exercise for me to actually get something out of this subject because category theory is very abstract and complex, and I don't want to just like learn for the sake of learning. I want to retain some of it and take it with me. And also it would be fun to sort of like it's kind of like I make this is like the highest level of learning. I'm synthesizing now because I took notes and I was like I want to also share my passion for this, like for my interests as well, because it's a newfound passion that I found and I'm really interested in it. So this entire series is just me geeking over category theory as I'm learning it and sort of showing how I'm more and better able to explain it to others and to have something at the end that I can be like proud of to say, "Oh, I know this subject now." And I haven't done this for anything else in my life. I think this is the first thing I've ever done like this, and I think it would be fun to see um like and to archive like how do I go through a course on something that I've never heard about before, other than through very limited funny math memes. So, a little bit of background as to why I'm doing this, because this is the first video, and this might as well be tacked on. This is an I'll probably put it as an optional introductory thing. So I got into category theory because I'm interested in maths and I'm very interested in CS. And computer science and math have a lot of intersections, especially at the higher abstractions of math. The more pure math you go into, the more it seems CS likes to take ideas from that. So when I was thinking about it, I love math memes because I don't understand them, and they're always like so abstract, and they always like use the English language in such weird ways. And the higher level up, you have to be very like mathematicians are very particular about certain things, but also come up with such silly names. For example, what does it mean for something to be nice? Because there's a precise mathematical definition for it. Depends on certain contexts. I don't know. Um, and it's how I got into category. Okay, theory. So I got into it from a couple of videos. I'm gonna put them in the credits actually as to what made me start this. But one of them is like a video from like 3 years ago that has coconut in the thumbnail, like a picture of a coconut in the thumbnail as nut. And in category theory, the reason why it's a funny joke is because co in category theory means like opposite. So a co-nut would be the opposite of a nut, but a coconut would be an opposite of a conut, which is would be the opposite of a nut. So the opposite of a nut is just a nut. So coconut is just a nut. And that one joke is just like, okay, what is going on in here? And then people spamming the phrase, a monad is a monoid in the category of endofunctors. And everybody's just like, oh, what does that mean? That's the joke. Nobody knows what that means. And spoiler alert, the end of the first course that from the playlist that I'm taking my notes from explains what the heck that sentence is, so I'm very excited. So I got into this subject because of memes, and then okay, the video recommended me to like like recommended me to a couple of other people's basic explanations, but this was the only course that was recommended from that video, and that course is called Category Theory for Programmers, and I'm like, okay, so I really didn't expect category theory, a subject in mathematics, to be so useful for programming. There's a tailor-made course for programmers, and I am somewhat of a programmer. Not a good one. I'm a high schooler. I'm not a good programmer, okay? I'm not even being humble. But, yeah. Um, yeah. So I don't know whether to put this onto the first part of the video. Yeah, I'll put it on the first part, sure. So then, the playlist that I'll be using is based on Dr. Bartosz Milewski's course, Category Theory for Programmers. Hopefully I get through all 3 parts. I'll be sharing this Google Doc. Essentially, I really hope like me posting this in any way doesn't detract from his excellent work and effort that he put into his like lectures, because I look, I just started on the series, but I think you should guys really genuinely go check out his lectures. Like, they're not for everybody, but like seriously, if you are interested in any sort of maths in any way, please just watch his first video, which is the motivation and philosophy, like his first lecture 1.1, which is titled Motivation and Philosophy as to Why You Should Learn Category Theory. Genuinely one of the most like, well, I haven't listened to many mathematical lectures, but it's a really good lecture that's just not even based on, like, you don't learn anything about the math yet, but like you gain such an appreciation for the subject that you're going in, and many of his tangents, as I will say, kind of deeply is sort of explore different niches and things like that. So they're really good lectures to watch, but I will say, unless you're nerdy, unless you're as nerdy as me, you probably won't. I don't know. I said please check them out. Please check them out. They're really good lectures. I ideally, in my perfect world, every single person who watches this video goes to watch his lectures, but I know that's not going to happen. So I will say, make your choice right now. You better watch every single one of his lectures, and that's it. You should start with his thing and then come back to this. Yes, watch the full series and come back to watch this series, or just don't watch this series at all. That's my wish. But like, also, realistically, that's not gonna happen. So you do whatever with your life. But seriously, really good lectures. I hope I'm not doing anything. I'm stepping over my own toes here. My bad. I'm also gonna cite everything, but yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to be thorough and not get in trouble, but also like really respect this guy's work, because it's really good, even though it's on YouTube for free. So this is maybe not his intention, but also like half his intention. But I digress. I watched the first lecture last year. This is being posted in the Big 2.6, by the way. So I took notes on this. I watched the first lecture in the Big 2.5, and now in the Big 2.6, I'm going to explain it to you, I guess. So, I guess if we want to talk about category theory, right? Well, the first thing in category theory is, what is a category? That's the first question you should ask, because in mathematics, if you get blank theory, for example, group theory or set theory, you should always ask, what the heck is a group, or what the heck is a set? Because it's not going to be the definition you think it is for the most of the time. So, before we get to that, category theory essentially is what you get when you abstract to the point where you're just dealing with objects and relationships between those objects. In the case, they call it morphisms, which are just arrows going from one object to another. And then an object is just an object. That's it. That's all you know. It's just an object. It's just a thing. You can just treat it as a point that are just endpoints for arrows, and those arrows are called morphisms. And what category theory really explores is, at such a high level of abstraction, every single mathematical field sort of starts to look the same. And what are the interesting things you can get from just looking at morphisms or just the relationships, like not looking at any underlying structures of objects or things like that. So for example, like in set theory, you're going to look at the what's going on with the internals of a set, or for example, topology. You're going to look at what's the cool structures of topological spaces. Or for number theory, you're like, look at how cool the structures of the primes are and what cool things we could do with that. And what category theory is, we don't need any of that. If you abstract far enough and you just look at relationships between objects, everything starts to look the same. And now, Saroj, you may ask me, if you cut away enough details from anything, doesn't it all look the same? For example, like, doesn't this book look like this book if I cut away every single detail and they're just books? And to that I say, well, this book and this game controller, they're really just the same object, right? They're just, I can hold them, and like in relationship to me, in the category of objects that I'm holding, I don't even think that's a category, but sure, like, yeah, these two are objects. So yeah. So before I start on like defining anything, sort of the philosophy behind category theory is sort of just being abstract to the point of, like, you abstract till like you hit the end of the road and you start looking from a downwards view from there almost. And what happens is essentially you start looking at things very differently in a more abstract way, in a more very pure way. If you're thinking of abstraction as making more and more pure maths, like the further abstraction you go, the more pure the math is. Category theory is the most pure math. It's the most abstract of math. It's abstractions of abstractions. It's insane. And that's why I like it so much, because it's so useless that it's useful. Mainly for the thing in programming, which is this concept of data hiding. So for example, why is category theory important? This Dr. Malusky touches on at the very end of lecture 1, is why is category theory important for programming, right? So in programming, we have these things for functional programming, which is the main one. Well, generally programming is based on, there's like lots of layers of abstraction. You have assembly, low level, you're literally telling the machine what to do. Then you have C, which is procedural programming, so you can write up procedures, and that allows you to sort of get away with things, because now you can just have if you write procedures, then you can just call it procedure, right? You don't need to and you can pass in arguments and things like that, rather than it referencing a specific point in memory every time you want to like write a block. You just say, here's an argument for that function, and it returns value and things like that. So it makes things it's a way more practical than just telling the computer exactly what to do. Then you have like this sort of branching paths from that. You have object-oriented programming, which is really neat and is very intuitive, I think, but you get issues with concurrent programming. And then you have Haskell and other functional programmings where they abstract the function part, but not like the values that you're dealing with. So one abstracts the objects that you're dealing with, and one abstracts the functions that you're dealing with, I think, is the best way to think about it. And the reason why object-oriented programming is cool is because of this concept known as data hiding. What a programmer wants is they only want you to be able to interact with objects, but not be able to, without having to know what's going on inside. That's like a programmer's dream, is that you look at the black box and you input something in and you get out a useful output, and these objects can communicate each other all without knowing what's going inside them. right? So you want an object to function without knowing what's going on inside. And when you program before, this is like during programming, like the main feeling you get from this is when you're doing libraries, because libraries don't have the source code out, generally speaking. They only have documentation that allows you to communicate with the library. Right, so that's pretty cool. And the thing of why, and functional programming, the thing it helps with is in object-oriented programming, when you're doing concurrent programming, which is when you're doing two things at the same time, which sounds really efficient. In object-oriented programming, things get iffy because objects change stuff and they access stuff without you telling the programmer what they're changing and what they're accessing, because that's the whole hidden part. Like, that's the neat thing about objects, is that they don't tell you that and they still work. Well, if you don't know what an object is like changing and accessing, and you're doing things at the same time, you can have one object trying to access a value and one object trying to change a value at the exact same time. And that's when you get data races. That's when things are a problem. So functional programming doesn't have that issue, but then you don't have that like object hiding nicety stuff. And then category theory looks at both of them and says that's pathetic. And here's category theory, which is, here's your perfect object that you don't know anything about, and all you have access to are the functions or morphisms or arrows or things that point one object to another object. And in Haskell, you use sets or types, as for example, like booleans, strings of characters, so like think of words, or the set of numbers. Those are classified under types in Haskell, and they are just taking from one type or set, well, not even this, it's just a set, one set to another set. So that's peak. And then category theory is just like, yeah, bro, like, just, this is the, like, I got your data hiding right here, because like you don't need to know anything about these objects. Like, these objects are just atoms. They don't got anything. And programmers really like that. They really like objects being treated like atoms, right? It's all about abstraction. And if you're trying to be as abstract as possible and data hide as much as possible, category theory is what you get. It's not an executable language. You can't write code in category and it executes something. That's what Haskell is for. But it's a language that allows you to express something more in more abstract ways without needing as much details. So I think that's pretty cool. And now that all the preface aside, what is a category? So, categories. So why is the category theory important? Really useful for programmers trying to do stuff that are even more abstract than the current, like, than the languages that they are currently using. Mainly Haskell and ML, Haskell, ML, and other functional programming languages. Right, and that's the main use that we've seen for this, and I think that's pretty neat. I do not know functional programming, so I guess I'll learn Haskell later. It would be fun if I did a Haskell, if I modeled like a category in Haskell. That would be peak, actually. Maybe I should do that. Maybe that should be one of my projects. Okay, so now we can get into the neat part, which is going to be the shorter part of the video, I guess. What is a category? So the things you need to know about categories is they contain two types of entities, that being categories contain objects and morphisms. So, oh, sure. I'll color code this. Morphisms and objects. Wow. Now you may say to me, sir, dear viewer, what is an object? Well, an object is a point. Well, it's not a point, but objects can be anything, but it doesn't matter. Does not matter what they are. So an object can be anything, but it doesn't matter what they are. But it doesn't matter. In category theory, I'll just say CT, they have no underlying structure and have no underlying structure and information. They also have no properties. So, in category theory, an object can be anything, but it doesn't matter. They have no underlying structure and information, and they also have no properties. This is going to be like all good like axioms. You know, what are objects? This is where people start getting frustrated, but don't worry, it gets a lot funnier. And a morphism, well, it's really hard to just explain what it is. You could say it's like a relationship. You could say it's like that, this or that, or whatever. But it's really just, a morphism is just an arrow that begins at an object and ends at another object. Oh, no. It ends at an object. Doesn't have to be another. Doesn't have to be another. So, I'm not too sure what the notations are, but you can literally just say, define an object like, define an object, you know, A and B, for example, with morphism F such that it goes from A to B. So that's literally it. That's sort of the notation. So F is a morphism that begins at A and goes to B, and you define an object A and B. So this sort of looks like how functions are defined in math, where you go like, I define function F going from the reals to the reals with oh crap, you can't say the reals to the reals. I mean, you guess it could, and you could just say f of x equals x squared, right? And this tells you, hey, you can only input in real values, and the output or the image of the function is going to be in the reals. So you're sort of having that exact same thing, but this is category theory. We don't know what a function is. What is this morphism doing? I don't know. It's just going from point A to point B, and that's all that matters. Yeah, so you don't... It's like there's a lot of... Because the entire point of category theory is you're abstracting. You're cutting off unnecessary details. And the gripe I have when I was first sitting down and watching the lecture was just that, like, these things matter to me, but it's category theory. You have to put on your category theory glasses. These things don't matter. Morphisms and objects don't have any underlying structure, no underlying properties. Other than for morphisms, this is their only property. It's an arrow that begins at an object and ends at an object. So a morphism must have a beginning and an end. I think. I don't think that's Are there morphisms that don't have an end? Maybe I should look at Google, but I'm just gonna say, yeah, sure. So I'm just gonna color code this, and we're gonna call it a day, right? So categories contain objects and morphisms, and an object can be anything, and a morphism is just an arrow that begins at an object and ends at an object. Now, categories also have three main important things. They have three other axioms that are the property axioms. So they have the identity axiom, identity, right? So for every object A in a category, there must exist a morphism. Generally it's ID A, for example, so it'd be ID subscript A, or whatever the name of the object is. There must exist morphism such that ID A goes from A to itself. And what you maybe I should get a whiteboard or like do some Google drawings next time. That would be nice. But this is my first thing, so sure. Don't worry about it. And there must exist a morphism with identity A such that A goes to A. So one of the examples he provides is in set theory. There's the set function, which is the identity set function, that takes every element in a set and then just maps it to itself. Now, it's clear to me you don't map the set to itself. You take the function, literally says the function of element 1 is element 1. The function applied to element 2 is element 2, and so on and so forth. And that's the identity function. So generally speaking, we label that as the identity morphism for every set if we're doing the category of sets. But that's getting ahead of myself. So just remember, for every object A in a category, there must exist the morphism, which is the identity morphism for that, such that the identity A just starts you at A and then gets you back at A. So we're going to color this in blue, and we're going to put this in red, because I like doing that. Blue, red, it's pretty cool. We're going to see all the colors I come up with in this series. So that's the first axiom. So yeah, I think do I put I'm going to put a title here. Crap. I'll put it at 2, maybe. Sure. No, 2 is that, so I'll do 3. Definitions. And then I'll do here. Object, right, is 1. Morphism is another. And then identity is another. Alright. Peak. This is Control-Alt-0. Why are these two things connected? They should not be. Okay, there it is. Alright. I should do these when I'm not this tired. And there are 2 more. There's control 4. What are the two more? There's composability. And this is this is the big one. This is the big one. This is the one you gotta pay attention to. So now you're asking to yourself, okay, so in category theory, objects can't encode information. Morphisms can't encode information. And that's like all the entities that a category contains. So like, what's the only information that is being conveyed by the category? And that's something called a composition table. So this is the main axiom to pay attention to. It kind of sets up the entire like coolness in category theory. So for composability, for every composable set, I would say he talks about it in terms of pair. So I'm just going to say pair, but you can also say set. Okay, for every composable set of morphisms, there must exist a morphism that is the composition of all the morphisms in that set. Now, this sounds like a whole bunch of gibberish nonsense, but essentially speaking, what does it mean for things to be composable, right? Two morphisms. So I'm going to say morphisms. Just remember, morphisms are just arrows. I know it's a funny word, but morphisms are just arrows that have beginnings and ends. And that's all that matters. Don't worry about any other mathematical gobbledygook. Okay, this is category theory. Okay, two morphisms are composable if one has a if one morphism's end is another morphism's beginning. I may or may not draw diagrams later to explain everything, but yeah, that might be a tomorrow thing. We'll see. And this might be a weekly thing, I'm gonna be honest. This seems like a lot of work. Oh boy. Okay. Are composable if one morphism's end is at another morphism's beginning. Cool. That basically tells you, for example, let's take this, right? This is the diagram. A to B to C. Right? And we have the morphism F going between A to B, and the morphism G going from B to C, right? So I would just put F is just defined from going to A to B. G is defined as going from B to C. Nice. So generally speaking, category theorists like to put this sort of like thing in here where it's like you just draw a diagram or a composition table. What is that? Well, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you later. So it's sort of fun, but essentially speaking, F and G are composable. F and G are composable because F ends at B and G begins at B. Therefore, there must exist a morphism G after F. I'll find a notation for it. Let's insert a special character. Symbols, special characters. Let's do the circle. I don't know what the correct symbol is. Sure, we'll do the ring operator. Okay. We'll do it later. Okay. There must exist a morphism G after F that is the composition of these two functions. Of these two morphisms, not functions. Sorry. This is... that goes from A to C. That is the composition of these two morphisms. And this is the main thing about category theory. So generally speaking, you look at something in math, right? And you build a category taking whatever objects you're dealing with. For example, sets. And sets have set functions that just take values from one set and they put those and map them to values in another set. So we could have sets and set functions as a category, and for every single composable function you have to write it down in this composition table, and you have to create it such that if there's a function that goes from a set x to y and another function that goes from a set y to z, then you have to write down in your composition table there is a function that takes the function that goes from y to z and composes it with the function that takes from x to y, and you get a happy little x to z bridge of friendship and happiness. And that's pretty cool. Except for the fact that you then forget that x and y and z were ever sets and that there are functions going between them, because they're not functions anymore, they're just arrows. But we have a composition table, and that's pretty cool. Do I know how to write a composition table yet? No. So this property is pretty important for category theory. Category theory, as it seems to be, by my first impression, the only way to encode the primary way that information is presented through composition tables. I don't know how to do those yet. I don't know how to make one yet. So that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty neat. We will learn probably in the next lecture how to make composition tables. Or maybe never. I don't know. Right. And then there's the one last lecture, associativity. It's sort of like associativity. It sounds about right for everything. The order in which you compose morphisms does not matter, as long as the morphisms are composable. So for example, A to B to C to D, and I'll put, for example, F, G, H. Doesn't matter. There exists a bunch of different compositions. Well, two. There exists F after, I'm gonna put this F after G, and H after G, right? But, and then a H after G after F, right? Which is pretty cool. So, technically, there are two ways to do this composition. Technically, the morphisms F after, I'll put it like this, H. Oh god, I really need that symbol. H after F after G is different from the morphism. Essentially speaking, it's just, it doesn't matter, like, when you're using brackets, for example, addition, right? If you have 1 plus 2 plus 3, doesn't matter if you do the 2 plus 3 first or the 1 plus 2 first. As long as you add them up together, you should get the same result, even though the order in which you did the addition is different. So this is what I'm writing out. Technically, the morphisms H after the composition F after G is different from the morphism H after G composed with F. However, they are isomorphic, and we don't care, essentially. They are not, so they're equal, but they're isomorphic. So they are like, they perform the same thing, so they sort of are the same thing. And there's technically a difference, but we don't care about that difference. We acknowledge the difference, but we don't care about it. That's a very important thing in math. You acknowledge something, but you don't have to necessarily care about it, and that pisses some people off. Because like, oh, you always have to care about it. No, you have to always have to acknowledge it. That doesn't mean you have to care about it. Thank you, mathematicians, for being cool like that. And then we can finally get to the definition of a category. Oh, I should do this first. What is this? Okay, sure. So, a category is a class of objects, right? A class is not a set, it's bigger than a set, not a set, bigger than a set, don't ask why. It's actually explained in the full lecture why it's a class and not a set. I think it's a really funny thing that sort of talks about my point earlier about you can always acknowledge something but not care about it. So set theorists, there's a lot of like paradoxes to come with sets. For example, what is the set of sets that don't contain themselves in itself? And if it's not in itself, then it should be in that set. But if it's not, if it's in that set, it should not be in that set. And that's a paradox, and set theorists don't like it. So categories just say it's a class. And a class of the class of all sets is bigger than a set, because you can never have a set that is the set of all sets. That's super cool. So, of objects that might have to have identity morphisms that have to have identity morphisms, and okay, as a set of objects that whose morphisms follow the three properties of composability, associativity, and identity. So every category must at least contain a morphism for every object, and then from there you can do a lot of funky stuff. I think this is where the math part of the video sort of ends, and it takes a bit into some examples. But honestly, I'm tired, so I think we could just stop here. And I don't even know how long this recording is going to be, but thank you very much for watching if you made it all the way through. This will be posted on my YouTube channel shortly, and it's 45 minutes long. Hello, Infinite Tunnel. Hello, Saroj.